thing, or if it's was Jill's intention to bring all of us sort of missing middle income housing folks together. But we focus on middle income for sale housing. Workforce housing is another way to think about it. We were founded during the Great Depression as part of the alphabet soup of the Roosevelt administration's housing programs. And we've persisted. We are essentially self-funded. We can also originate and service our own mortgages, which is a wonderful tool to have when you're working with middle income buyers who may not be particularly well served by the existing banking and mortgage markets. So I found my way, and currently we focus our work in the North Corktown neighborhood in Detroit. We've been in Detroit now for about 20 years. Before that, we worked largely in Pontiac. And before that, before the cities were incorporated, we were sort of in unincorporated Northern Oakland County back in the 30s and 40s. I found my way through sort of a non-traditional path. This was something I've been interested in for ages. I did my undergrad 20 years ago now. My 20-year college reunion was this year in urban planning and government. And I got my master's in urban planning. But during that time, sort of found my way into a career in nonprofit administration and arts and culture fundraising in Detroit. So it was this sort of fight for about 15 years to try to make these two things come together, arts and culture in Detroit and community development in Detroit. And I got very lucky. I served on the board of Oakland Housing for about 6 years before I was able to move into the executive director role at an organization that I already knew and loved. I've also worked, not so much worked, I've been an elected and an appointed official, so unpaid, in the public sector, working on the planning commission in my community, trying to make some changes to really just sort of the future direction of development in our suburb here in Metro Detroit. I will stop now.
That is fantastic. And no, you know what, I hadn't thought about that all of us kind of focus in that missing middle, but I think a lot of it is because we're problem solvers and we see such a need in that space, you know. It's interesting. Our last guest, and someone that I follow pretty closely because her projects are, in my mind, you know, really the answer to what Michigan needs in a lot of rural communities. So glad to have you here, Marilyn. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got where you are.
Thanks, Jill. I'm Marilyn Crowley. I'm the VP of Investment for Michigan Community Capital, which is a 501c3 nonprofit and community development finance institution. My background, I grew up moving a lot. I moved 13 times in the first 18 years growing up.
Wow.
Yeah, so I became very attracted to community and what makes a community, since I kind of was like an alien. I never was involved in a community for very long. And I finished high school in Metro Detroit and was very, very interested in the blight of Detroit in the early 2000s and was just like super attracted to it. Why did this happen? You know, what do you do about it? I ended up going to school for photography my freshman year in New York City, and I hated it. And I really missed like the trees of Michigan. So I ended up moving back to Michigan, which I never thought I would have, because in high school I was like, I hate Michigan. But the only thing I knew about Michigan was the suburbs of Metro Detroit. So I didn't really know that much about Michigan, which nothing wrong with suburbs. I was just an angsty teenager. So I ended up going to MSU, study community relations. I was very, very, very interested in urban farming as like a solution for blight. I ended up starting an urban flower farm business my senior year of college in one of the land bank properties in Lansing. And from there, I my senior year of college, I got an internship at the Michigan Economic Development Corporation with the community assistance team. And I ended up staying at the MEDC for over 5 years, ended up being on the community assistance team, worked on the Redevelopment Ready Communities program. So definitely got more into the real estate redevelopment side of community development. Ended up taking a job with a private construction company for a few years and then moved over to Michigan Community Capital about 3.5 years ago. So I'm super interested in the work that we do at MCC. I run our real estate redevelopment or real estate development arm. So we've got about 35 million of projects under construction and another 90 million in pre-development. And I thought I heard Jen say she doesn't have anything under construction. I am not going to have anything starting. I don't know what's going to be starting. So that's kind of weird. In the past 3 years, we've had a pretty consistent closing schedule. So yeah, it's a weird time right now for construction, but yeah, I feel like I come at it from how do we make our communities better? And I happen to be in the space of missing middle housing, but I'm also super interested in how it all fits together. Schools, food systems, green space. So, I hope to continue to diversify the fingers I have in the community development pot.
I think, that kind of rolls into one of the questions that we have, and that's, of all the things that you do, Marilyn, with the different roles that you play at MCC and all the different kinds of projects you do, Kate, your role as an elected official and a nonprofit housing developer, and Jen, you wear a million hats. You're an educator, you're a licensed realtor, you're a developer. What of all those things, right? Of all your spinning plates, what's your secret passion? What is the thing that gets you up in the morning? What is it that really drives you to do the work that you're doing of all of those things? Let's start with Jen.
So for me, it's all about making a positive impact, right? How can you create some momentum? How can you create some positive dynamic change for a community? So initially when I started my company, I was fortunate enough to redevelop some historic buildings, which I love to do. I also found that I wasn't quite satisfied enough in that a single individual property can't address all of a community's issues. So how do you also have some shape and focus on neighborhoods, on overall economic development, on really creating, spaces for entrepreneurs? And I really kind of ventured into having multifaceted roles that allowed me to do both, right? How do I focus on properties that really need me? How do I also help other people invest in property? How do I help other people invest in their community, teach them how to do that, and create generational wealth, right? A resilient local economy. And then beyond that, how can I also look at an overall community, because it's about so much more. So for me, I have to say positive impact, because there's so many of those pieces that really do drive me. And it's hard work, right? There's a million easier ways to make money or to make a living. But at the end of the day, it's really, really rewarding to go and walk into a community and see it really hustling and bustling when it didn't have that drive and that energy before, and to know that you've made a sustainable and positive impact.
That's fantastic. Kate, how about you?
I'm not sure how to say it. So tell me if I'm rambling. But my homeowners are what, sort of my bottom line is every day. And they call me, I've been told by the city that I'm a guardian angel. I'm a hand holder, not in a bad way. I'm a concierge, so I'm, very involved because we hold the majority of their mortgages, but also because I feel a responsibility to this neighborhood, which we're continuing to build out. That's what Oakland Housing is focused on for decades, is not just plunking down a few houses, but really developing neighborhoods. I feel very responsible to make sure that these middle income homeowners get their NEZ paperwork processed expeditiously so that their taxes are coming in at appropriate rates. So
Yeah.
these are big deal. And $5,000 is a big deal when you make $50,000 a year, right? And you've got a kid in school and you've got Detroit car insurance to pay. And so on one hand, it's my homeowners in terms of doing whatever I can to be an advocate for them and an advocate for the community. But on the other, it is really the excitement around being able to create generational wealth for otherwise marginalized communities, right? So we don't advertise our homes on the MLS. We advertise locally. We focus on people who are currently renting in the neighborhoods where we work, people who perhaps have had to leave and are now able to return and become a homeowner in the neighborhood where their family lived for generations. So making sure that people who've really stuck it out in Detroit not only aren't displaced, but get a piece of the upside of the development of their neighborhood is something that I feel particularly passionate about in our work.
And Marilyn, you already touched on a little bit, some of the things that drive you, but I know your work also touches on some of those marginalized populations. So is there anything you want to add to what you're passionate about, what drives you?
I mean, I think I feel really excited about doing things that people say you can't do. So I feel like a big one in rural communities right now is like nobody believes in the project, and then you do a project and it's like wildly successful. And it, takes years of convincing bankers and, local officials and other funders that, you can build, 300 square foot studios in, a small town. So I guess it's exciting to me to kind of continuously have the opportunity to like ask the question, like, why not? Why isn't this happening? Who isn't doing this? And I feel lucky that I work for an organization that isn't about the bottom line, the profit, because that's the reason why a lot of people aren't doing some of the projects that we're doing, is because it doesn't make any money. So yeah, I like bringing new ideas to the projects I do.
And we're going to talk about some of those things in a little bit, because you've got some really exciting models that you've built. But first I want to ask, the opposite of what drives you, what keeps you up at night? And part of the reason I added this question, I was at the Michigan Economic Developers Association annual meeting last week, and there was a very strong narrative about how Michiganders need to tell their story better. And I wasn't very happy about that message because I feel like, our biggest issue, what keeps me up at night, is that housing is not Michigan's #1 economic development priority. That's what keeps me up at night. When we are aligning our economic development and our housing efforts, I'm going to sleep a lot better. But that question was asked to our panel. What is keeping you? I mean, that and the cost of construction, to Marilyn's point, and timing and everything else is keeping me up. But just wanted to kind of set the stage there. Jen, what's keeping you up now that you've taken a year off of development, but you have a great perspective on the landscape? What's keeping you up at night?
Right. It's not a year quite yet. We'll see. I mean, opening a restaurant this year was that kept me up at night for a little bit. Thankfully, I have a great operating partner and I didn't have to, carry the load myself. But gosh, I think one of the big pieces is it's got to be, climate change and resiliency. Really looking at, how can we, as people that are shaping the landscape, really have honest conversations about, okay, do we start building in infrastructure where we're raising hot water heaters and equipment and we're not putting things in basements? How do we really make sure that everything that we're building is resilient? And when we're advocating at a local and community level, and when we're advocating for housing policy across the state, how do we make sure that homeowners that have already invested in their homes and in their neighborhoods have access to be able to put in some technologies and elements that are going to help them overall? I also think from an economic resiliency standpoint, not only could Michigan tell our story better, but we could be a lot more welcoming as a culture. And I say that as I sit here on, the east side of Michigan, which, east side and west side are a little bit different. I would say that, we've got a little bit more of that Rust Belt, former manufacturing economy. And sometimes there's this culture of scarcity. We get afraid that other people are going to move into our communities and really change something, right? Something more for someone else means less for me. And I think talking about, how can you come from a place of abundance? How can we be welcoming? How can we tell people if, their home was lost in a wildfire somewhere else, they could come and move to Michigan, and they could have a great life here and everything that we have to offer. So I really think that there's so much more that we could all do within that space around housing and quality of life and climate resiliency to tell our story better and to prepare for the future.
Thanks. Kate, how about you? What's keeping you up at night?
It pains me to say this as someone who is such an advocate for the public sector and frankly for bureaucracy. You can't have transparency without bureaucracy, is what I always say. But that is what's keeping me up at night. And the not just unresponsiveness, but sort of unfeelingness of bureaucracy, right? So I work with homeowners who I have a very clear sense of their financial position. I am very, very close to their financial position. I understand, this isn't just a paperwork frustration. This is a, can I pay my bills frustration when the city screws something up, right? So the things that keep me up at night are knowing that, someone's kid is starting school and they're changing a job and their car's in the shop and they just got a $7,000 tax bill that was supposed to be a $1,700 tax bill, right? So, and that no one will answer a phone anywhere. So these are like the very practical things, the things that used to keep me up at night. When I worked in arts and culture, were whether or not I pay my staff. So amazingly, the wonderful thing about my job and it being at an organization that is self-funded, that has really built up sort of a large pot of revolving funds to do our own projects over the years, is that I don't have to now worry about whether I'm getting a paycheck or whether I only have one staff member now, so I don't have people hounding me for things, which is wonderful. But I really think it allows me to focus more on the mission of my work, get into some of the nitty gritty of trying to improve neighborhoods and improve lives, because I know that I can pay my bills. And I know exactly how my homeowners are feeling when they're not sure if they can pay theirs. So I guess those are it's not even necessarily development related, but it's just sort of those people things keep me up at night.
I definitely feel your pain as we, all of us try to income qualify for certain income targeted projects. Just talking to folks about, what they're facing. It just drives us to work even harder to find solutions. And in that vein, I think we've all found creative ways to solve problems in our projects and in our careers. I want to talk about things that you're excited about in the industry that are happening that may be a light for the future, a pathway forward. Jen just produced a guidebook for the state on the use of TIF for housing. Marilyn's doing community land trusts. Kate, you're using a unique model. So you're all in a space that, you're trying different techniques, different methods, different tools to make housing affordable. So just want to talk about where you see some of the greatest opportunity for housing in the things that you're working on. Let's start with Jen.
I still want to know what keeps Marilyn up at night.
Oh my gosh, did I miss Marilyn?
Just because I'm super curious, because she's brilliant.
You know what? And it's honestly, it's because I haven't had enough coffee. And so I apologize, Marilyn. What is keeping you up at night? Thank you, Jen. Jeez.
I mean, it's literally, it doesn't keep me up at night, but it does wake me up like too early in the morning. But I feel like for the past year and a half, I've been trying to solve a problem that doesn't have a solution. As costs go up, construction costs go up, projects that already didn't make any financial sense, like make way less financial sense. And, you can't, when you're a mission-driven organization, you can't just increase rents to offset it. And I feel like I've been looking at the same projections for the same 6 projects for a year and a half. And, we've been doing what we can to get project costs down, but some of it is what it is, without completely throwing out the project and, trying a completely different, site, a different way to build a building. So I think, we've got these different rounds of funding that different state agencies are waiting to announce. They got the, state historic tax credits, they got the RAP, they've got this new missing middle fund. And I think we've kind of reached the end, that if we can't make these projects work with this funding, then, we're going to have to just kind of start over. Okay, we can't, building mixed use buildings in downtowns is not how we're going to do it these days. So I think that's been the most frustrating thing for me. And then kind of a more like bigger picture. I loved, Jen, that you said, global warming and sustainability. How are you supposed to create sustainable communities and build sustainably if you can't even make housing for middle income? I mean, they're not even low income. So it's, you're trying to build housing for someone who makes 40, 50, 60,000 a year, and you can't figure it out, even with millions of dollars of subsidy. Then how do you really get creative and start looking at energy efficiencies? And I'm super interested in the way, food systems connect to urban environments. And it just feels like I'm not even off of square one. Like, just, we got to build the housing first. So hopefully, we'll get some movement in some of these programs, or, maybe it'll create space for me to start researching other ways of building. Because the projects I have in front of me right now it's like, it's just, I don't have a solution for them. So that's what keeps me up at night.
I am so glad you said that. When they sent out the questions for the MEDA panel, one of them was about getting to net zero in housing. And I was like, I can't get to zero in my sources and uses. So I completely feel your pain. And, as somebody with an environmental background, it pains me that we can't prioritize that more in our work. But you're right, it's so difficult to make deals pencil right now. So hopefully,
I just needed to make like a 1% return, and I still can't get it to pencil.
Yeah. I think that's what we're not talking about. Everybody's throwing out the need for environmentally sustainable products and everything like that, but nobody understands the difficulty right now in trying to make these deals pencil. So with that, back to Jen.
It's hard to turn around from that. I might have done that to myself, because it's true. I need to make more than a 1% return, and I won't have any investors back my project, even if they have a strong belief in social return on investment for less than, a market rate investment. So it's difficult. And even on the sustainability factor, there's a lot of times when I teach small scale developers across the country, and I almost have to like, slap their hand a little because they're like, well, I want to be able to put in like these rainwater systems. I'm gonna do solar, I'm gonna do all this. And I'm like, does it pencil on its own?
Yeah.
Is it bankable, right? Like, what's your market like? What are you going to charge rent for? How, like, understand the numbers first before you can even add these systems, because oftentimes we don't need like really fancy new technology, but like, is it good enough? Is it sustainable? And can you look at adding things later? What am I excited for?
Yeah.
The fact that we're all having this conversation, we continue to. I think that that's big. I think we've all been kind of working on community development in neighborhoods and how do we create more robust local economies for a long time, but it's never really had the amount of presence or importance that it does right now. And right now you can talk to lenders and say, hey, I want to build housing. And they're like, oh, there's a big need for that, right? Their ears perk up. And that hasn't always been the case, right? Especially after 2008, they were like, we don't need housing. We don't need any of these things. So I'm excited that, millennials and my generation could finally afford to buy homes. Like, it only took a pandemic, but that was great.
How about you, Kate? What are you working on that you think might be a bright light for the future?
So I'm going to take off my Oakland housing hat sort of and put on my Ferndale Planning Commission hat, because we are finishing our master land use plan updates, and we'll be soon rolling into some pretty significant zoning updates that really need to align with building code updates as well. So we're an inner ring suburb. We are a largely built out suburb. My house is 103 years old. So I'm on the older side of Ferndale housing, but the majority of our homes are over 70 or 80 years old.
Yeah.
And not in a bad way necessarily. So we need reinvestment in our community, but we also need additional density in our community. So we've got, these houses that used to house families of 5 now house, 1 individual, and they feel like they don't have enough space. So we've seen our density go down at exactly, in terms of our geography, the place where we should be densifying. So in order to bring in additional missing middle housing, in order to really bring some of the unregulated rentals that are on there back on the tax rolls, we're going to be advocating for changes to our residential zoning, but also some changes to our building code, because I want some of these missing middle housing options and rentals that actually come on the books to be affordable. I don't want only sort of, luxury new construction. I want renovations that create duplexes. I want people to add granny flats. I want people to retrofit existing homes, not just scrape and rebuild. And in order to do that, we need to really look closely at our 2, 3, and 4 unit residential requirements around things like sprinklers. Fire suppression is going to immediately kick any retrofit or new construction out of the realm of affordability just because of the costs. And we know that we have very safe and functional structures within our community right now that have been here for 80 or 100 years, that are duplexes, that are 4 squares, that are small apartment buildings. What can be done to really think through rather than reflexively require things in our local building code. We have a fire chief who's willing to think about this, because if we don't align our building code with our vision and our goals that we're putting into our zoning code, we're not going to get the construction that we want. You can update the zoning all that you want, but if you want affordable middle income, missing middle housing types, you're not going to get them if you require $100,000 a unit fire suppression systems. So that's the stuff that like the nitty gritty stuff that I'm excited about, is that Ferndale can be a leader in this. A lot of our neighboring communities look to us to take the first step. They looked to us to take the first step on transit and bike lanes and marijuana, and now they'll look to us to take the first step on housing and building code updates for missing middle housing. So
that is
my appointed official hat coming off. Now we'll go back to work hat. Not elected anymore. Thankfully, I get yelled at way less.
and this conversation is happening across the country. I do a lot of work with the Urban Land Institute in technical advisory panels, and lots of cities are really focused on more flexible zoning to encourage these products. So that's very hopeful. And thank you for your service, by the way. Need more women in positions like that. So
Yeah, I love being in charge of things.
I'm not surprised. And you do a good job. Marilyn, where's the bright spot in the future from your perspective?
I don't want to just repeat what Jen and Kate said, but I'm excited that people are talking about inclusivity in development, in terms of, you know, people developing in their own community, and it's not just outside. I'm excited about the conversation that elected and appointed officials are having about the need for housing. And I feel like there's like, it is breaking right now. And so people are like open to new ideas. And so I'm excited to be in the space with resources, to be able to like try some of those ideas on. And so, yeah, I think we are going through a frustrating time in, you know, development land, but I do hope it will lead to some growing pains and some innovation. And I don't know what it is yet, the answer, but, you know, that's, I guess, what I'm excited about moving forward.
Yeah. I did a deep dive into the statewide housing plan that was published. Hadn't really taken the time until recently to really look at what the goals were, what the strategies were. And I think one of the things that I'm really excited about that plan, because it's very high level. There's 8 priorities, 5 targets, one of which is to either rehab or build new 75,000 housing units in the next 5 years, which impacts all of us. But from a high level, it will be sent down on a regional level for regional action plans done by regional organizations working together. And that was the most exciting thing for me, because I mean, we all come from different areas of the state. We're all looking at different areas of the state, and housing needs look different in Sault Ste. Marie than they do in Detroit. There's a lot of commonalities, a lot of common issues, but this really needs to be done on a local level. So I am really excited about the statewide housing plan. When it first, you know, when they were talking about it, I was like, oh, another plan, you know, we have another plan, another planning effort. But I really think that at a regional level, our organizations know. They know what the housing needs are, who the populations are that aren't getting served, the employers that need housing for expansion. So I am really excited about the implementation of that plan. And I really hope that it helps build a regional dialogue across the state where these areas are really talking to each other and sharing knowledge, kind of like we are today, to solve some of these problems. So pretty excited about that. And policy. This is typically Shannon's area, so I'm going to fall short a little bit because she's the policy guru, but definitely want to talk about any policies that you see in the works at the state or federal level that you're excited about, that you know you think might be something that could help push the needle, anything that you're personally active with. And I'm just going to open this up for any of you to jump in, because I don't know how active each of you are in policy. Marilyn.
I'll go first. MCC has been super active in advocating for the Missing Middle Fund that was approved and is being administered by MISTA. So that's been consuming a lot of my time, is like looking at that program and asking questions about legislation versus, you know, the rules that MISTA has for the program and how does it apply into my projects. I feel more interested in looking at why construction pricing is so high and how do you address it? How do you look at sourcing locally? How do you look at training more workforce so that labor costs, are not inflating? I'm super interested in, manufactured homes, but I'm not excited about kind of the product that exists. And so like, what
Yeah.
are some innovations that can come out and be like a Michigan-based solution? Because we do have a lot of natural resources. But that is definitely something I wish I could work on more. And instead I'm kind of focusing on the funding that's right in front of me.
Yeah, it's difficult. Kate, Jen, either of you following any policy that you think is interesting for Michigan?
I mean, the missing middle rules process, I guess it just kind of got rolled out on top of the legislation that came this spring. I think it was actually like the day before our annual board retreat in March was when that legislation passed. So we were all like, oh, and then it really sort of sunk in what some of the numbers meant in the legislation. So actually it doesn't serve my middle income home buyers, which is frustrating. I'm a 501c4 as a private foundation, as opposed to a C3. It's not an impediment, it's not a barrier I can't overcome, but now I would need to form a partnership. I would need to do other things. And as Marilyn mentioned earlier, as a mission-driven organization, I can't just offset, sort of lower priced or subsidized by me, often housing, by charging more for something else. I really have to stay completely mission focused. I can't build market rate or sell to people above a certain income level. And the tools are never quite perfect. So it just takes a lot of time and energy then to try to figure out where you fit within the tool. I've got a meeting with a friend from Ford this afternoon so that they can try to figure out how they might be able to help and advocate for us. So it's I will definitely not be applying in the first round for the Michigan funding. I can put that out there. There's just no possible way. We're too far. We're too far away from having the information that we need. But where I hope it isn't a one-time, one-off situation. I hope that this is renewed and slightly tweaked. Even if it's not slightly tweaked and I never use it, I still hope it's renewed, because it does complement things that are happening that other nonprofits are working on. So I think the other thing that I just want to, again, looking a little bit more micro, thinking about our community in Ferndale, some of our other sort of tax-based challenged communities that are seeing a not unquantifiable, reasonable tax-based erosion, or perhaps lack of tax-based growth because of short-term rental housing. So regulations around short-term rentals are something that we're really interested in. We need more information on this, but in order to get more information on what's out there in terms of unregulated rentals, who still has homesteaded property that's an unlicensed rental, how is this impacting housing availability and affordability in my community? We've had to put some basic regulations in place just to try to get some of this on the books. So it's an interesting challenge. I think there's a perception that no one can buy a house because everything's an Airbnb. That's not accurate. But are there some neighborhoods in Ferndale where suddenly you have on a small residential block like 4 or 5 houses that are used more than half the year as a short-term rental? Yeah, like my block. it was sort of amazing to see homes that had been low-cost rentals because they were picked up cheap during the downturn flip into the short-term rental model now. So you've displaced your affordable renters because it's more lucrative for the owner, whether it's a corporation or an individual. I'm sort of agnostic about, I can't do anything about that. But what I can do is try to decrease the density of these rentals, make sure they get on my tax rolls, not as homesteaded properties, but as rentals, that there's some type of regulation there, both for tax revenue and for safety. But really try to figure out how it's impacting our environment when it comes to housing affordability, the ability for generational transitions to happen within our housing, and address the perception. Again, I think it's really more a perception than reality that people can't get into housing because everything's Airbnb now.
Right. I still would like Kate, by the way, to come and invest in some Bay City housing, because now and then she'll send me listings. She'll be like, why is this so cheap? I'm like, come on, come to my neck of the woods. Come on over, friend. So I would say in terms of policy, in fighting for the middle, I feel like we need to have both stronger like grassroots local efforts as well as different federal policies. So locally, I would say, obviously, I'm a huge supporter of using tax increment financing for public good for housing and attainable housing. And I think that being able to formulate that further into policy in order to create a local tool and mechanism to create housing is a huge asset for communities to be able to do. Zoning codes, of course, are really big, and really getting a hold of the dialogue and talking to residents and talking about equitable development and talking about generational wealth building. There's so much from a local policy standpoint that we can continue to build on. I read a study that was out yesterday. ULI had sent out, another study, and they were talking about one that Up for Growth did, and they're looking at, the federal deficit of housing and how many houses, we're not building. And I was shocked at how low Michigan's number was compared to what we know Michigan's number to be based on the statewide housing plan and work that we've done across the state. And then I looked at the way that they're measuring it, and it's through economic mobility. It's through the amount of dual income households, and it's through being walkable or having a transit station within 1 mile, right? They're saying like just build in those places. And I think the LIHTC program and federal low income housing tax credit program has also echoed some of this, that when I worked on affordable housing in Miami, sure, pretty much any site qualifies, scores really well. But when we're talking about Michigan, we're talking about rural development, when we're talking about some of the work like Michigan Community Capital does, when we're talking about the area in which I live, we're not built that way, right? It's really quick to just say, oh, red line through half of Michigan communities that don't apply, right? So how do we also look at some federal policy, and how do we shape federal policy in a way that doesn't leave us out? And I think that one of the exciting pieces of that would be, having Pete Buttigieg in as Department of Transportation. He and his husband have a home in Michigan. He's from Indiana. So I'm curious to see, is he also really looking at, cities and towns like ours and the Midwest and, your Lake Belt and Rust Belt cities, and how some federal policies are really kind of leaving us behind currently, and how we can change that.
I think that's a good point. A good friend of ours from Smart Growth America, Christopher Coase, is now in Pete's cabinet. And that's really exciting, because I think a lot of the tools that he was working on are really great solutions for all the problems that we're trying to solve. So I think, one of the things that definitely wanted to talk about was, I don't know, I think we've already answered this question, where is the greatest need in housing right now? I think we'd all say missing middle. And Kate, you touched on some marginalized populations, but is there a specific area that you see a specific need that you're either excited or feel compelled to address in the housing industry in Michigan? And I can start. I mean, we're working on for sale, missing middle. That's really where I think there's a need. And so we're trying to solve that problem. What about you guys? Anybody?
Generational transitions, I think, are the biggest thing that we're thinking about. Yes, we're under building where we need to be building, in terms of meeting demand, but we also have somehow not acknowledged that we have the 3 largest generations in America's urbanized history all competing for the same housing at the same time, right? It's just more people competing. And so I always say I don't necessarily need more 3 and 4 bedroom homes in Ferndale. I need somewhere for my parents to downsize to, and that doesn't
Right.
exist. So this generational transition is it bumpy, partly because of that recession in 2008. We're looking at what we can do in our developments in North Corktown to make sure that we're planning for multi-generational options. We don't necessarily serve any particular age range, but acknowledge that, I mean, we've already got parents of our current homeowners in our townhomes in North Corktown who want to know when we're building, something that they can move into next door that doesn't have as many stairs. Like, I've had 2 moms ask me that because grandmas want to be close to their kids and they don't want to have stairs. So what's the, what's the way to improve family connectivity, to make sure that generational transitions in housing are happening, and to support, again, these built out or redeveloping communities so as not to continue our exurban expansion, but to reinvest in places that are already built up.
Either one of you, Marilyn, Jen?
I mean, I'd also say, for sale, how can we continue to kind of build and advocate for that? I think it's difficult to do. It's not something I've necessarily figured out. To Marilyn's point earlier too, we're really looking at such a multifaceted system, but also needs through this whole area. So how do we synthesize the need for workforce development with housing construction, to train the next generation and be able to build affordable housing, right? They've done this in history's past, right? We did this after World War II. We rebuilt all of our infrastructure and housing really in a different way. How do we kind of reignite this again? And I think too, even at a local level, if we're looking at economic empowerment, health, safety, and wellness in households, and we're looking at an ALICE population, which is asset limited, income constrained, employed. If you're looking at this population, how many times are we mitigating for symptoms versus solving for the root cause, which is having a new home that doesn't have a ton of issues that are going to continue like drain your account, that causes that health and safety for your family and the economic resiliency and generational wealth creation.
Marilyn?
I think the biggest opportunity is localizing real estate again. I feel like where we're at right now is there's just not enough businesses in the industry to meet the need. And I think there's a huge opportunity to look at how do we solve the problems from within our own community. I mean, if you just look at how buildings are built now, it's all from different countries. And so Michigan has tons of talent, tons of natural resources, tons of manufacturing history. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for Michigan to create the talent and the materials that are needed to address housing kind of from within the state. So it's an exciting, untapped opportunity.
One of the things that I'm really excited about is the democratization of real estate investing, the change in the real estate investment landscape, who we're seeing as real estate investors, how they're investing, and that, bridging that gap between the everyday person and these opportunities. So many prop tech apps coming forth with, single family rental investment opportunities like Fintor, things like that. I just really I'm just excited about changing this industry. And I know it's going to take another 100 years before more people that look like us and more women that don't look like us, that are women of color, are at the table and doing this kind of work. But just starting to see the seeds of just access to the real estate world, and just hoping that that path continues and we see more barriers broken down, more women of color who are emerging developers getting money, getting seeded for their development projects. That's really exciting to me. I mean, it may not happen in my lifetime, and I'm okay with that. Probably won't. But it's something that keeps me going and drives me, is really thinking about how to add more color to our space and support it. So there's a couple of questions in the chat. The first one is, there's a question about new market tax credit for sale housing, but with a 7-year hold, I'm really not sure how that's happening.
Jill, we've been researching how to use our new market allocation for housing. So there's basically 2 ways you do it. There's one where the compliance is more of like the habitat model. So it's the mortgage that's kind of holding on to for the 7 years.
Maybe the common elements of a condo or something like that?
It's
or you mean the
looking at
individual mortgages?
the individual mortgages.
Individual mortgages, okay.
And then there's another way to look at it, where it's a little bit like, I feel like I need longer to explain it. We haven't done a project here in Michigan. We are looking at models, and we've had a couple conversations with some habitat groups and some other nonprofit developers to try to allocate new market tax credit projects. The problem is the project has to be big enough to justify using the new market tax credit projects.
Right.
And so we need an execution counterparty, that can do a 10, 20, $30 million housing development that is, mission driven.
Yeah.
So definitely, I mean, we are waiting to hear about our next allocation, but MCC is definitely open to brainstorming and finding an execution, partner for that.
Well, that is excellent to hear, and we are running out of time. I want to thank all 3 of you for joining today, and thank you personally for your work. What you're doing in this space is really leading change. And it's exciting to watch all of you as you are successful. And I think one of the things that I love, Kate, you said it, you're thinking about your parents in the space that they will live. I think one of the things that we bring to the table as women is that we approach commercial real estate development with all of our loved ones in mind, whether you have children or not, parents, nieces, nephews, aunts, uncles, whoever, brothers and sisters, people in your family that have disabilities. That's how we approach development, bringing all of those people with us. And so I'm just very excited to see what you all produce, because I know that everything you do is going to solve problems, because you're always thinking about all those folks in your lives. So thank you all for being here. We are really grateful for your time, and keep up the wonderful work. We'll see everybody next time on Housing Women episode 5.
Thanks, Jill. Keep up all that work yourself.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.